This is the voice of Idaho agriculture. Each week, we bring you agriculture news and perspective. Stay tuned to this week's Idaho Farm Bureau's weekly podcast from the state capitol. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jake Putnam. The American Farm Bureau is pushing Congress for tax incentives. Chad Smith has more.
Tax incentives that encouraged biodiesel production and help short-line railroads maintain their tracks expired at the end of 2017. The American Farm Bureau Federation is pushing to have those incentives reinstated and extended into the future. Pat Wolf, AFBF Senior Director of Congressional Relations, talks about the impact of the expired incentives.
Biodiesel producers and short-line railroads don't know if they're going to have a tax credit. Therefore, they don't know how much money they can invest. They may, and I think are, cutting back on their investments and in some cases may be not investing at all in their industries.
Wolf says Farm Bureau wants Congress to reinstate the tax credits immediately.
There's a chronic problem, and that's finding a piece of legislation to attach them to that's considered must pass. There is one opportunity, the end of the year budget deal. If Congress fails to act by November 21st, we're in another government shutdown situation. So that's considered a piece of must pass legislation.
Wolf says these tax incentives impact industries that directly affect farmers.
The biodiesel tax credit is important because of the huge market that the biodiesel industry provides for oilseeds like soybeans. Short-line railroads connect farmers to the mainline railroads. If your short-line railroads are in trouble, you don't have any way to get the supplies you need, and you lose a way to get the things that you produce to the market.
Chad Smith, Washington.
And the top Farm Credit Administration official says there's some worrisome similarities between the current farm economy and conditions in the early 1980s. Gary Crawford reports.
The nation's farm credit system.
The system is, in fact, safe and sound.
But Farm Credit Administration Chairman Glenn Smith told a House Ag Subcommittee hearing Tuesday the farm economy not quite so safe and sound. With growing farm debt levels, continued low commodity prices, Smith says we are not yet at the crisis levels of the late 1980s.
But I think we're at a level that's comparable to the early 80s. Decreasing farm incomes, decreasing margins, eroding current ratios. And at that time in the Midwest, we'd lost 15 to 20% of our land values. Guess what? Today we've lost 15 to 20% of our land values in the Midwest.
Another worrisome similarity?
The late 70s and early 80s were typified by trade wars. At that time, it was the Soviet Union with the grain embargo.
Now it's China. In fact, Smith said approval of the USMCA and Japan trade agreements and some kind of a deal with China would help improve the farm economy, help the many farmers who are struggling to hold on. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
And what we're seeing is more farmers who have been turned down for loans by the usual lenders are going to so-called alternative lenders.
More and more desperate farmers turning to lenders outside the usual banks and government systems.
We're seeing an increase, and it is a concern.
Farm Credit Administration Chairman Glenn Smith telling a House Ag Subcommittee Tuesday, normally if farmers are turned down for credit from everybody, then the USDA's Farm Service Agency is supposed to be the lender of last resort. But
unfortunately, isn't always. And these operators are looking to alternative sources because they have no choice.
So they go to what some call payday lenders who charge very high interest rates, making it all the more difficult for a producer to pay back that loan, possibly leading to foreclosure of the farm. And Smith said farm foreclosures are up.
The numbers aren't alarming, but the percentage increases are.
Smith said the Farm Credit Administration is issuing guidance to local farm credit associations to encourage them to
step up outreach finance efforts to those troubled families to come up with a plan for the best possible solution.
In Washington, Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
And back here in Idaho, the Twin Falls Canal Company got a matching grant from the Bureau of Reclamation, so they're lining one of their canals.
This is a canal lining project on the Twin Falls Canal Company Highline Canal.
For 100 years, this stretch of the Highline Canal has seeped irrigation water into the groundwater table. And when the Twin Falls Canal Company had an opportunity to fix the problem, they jumped on it. Brian Olmsted.
So historically, this has always been the biggest water losing stretch on our canal. About over 25 CFS per mile through this reach. So, now with the value of water and the water we can save can be stored up above and help us and everybody else, really an important project and good timing on it.
The Bureau of Reclamation has funding for companies in their Water Smart program, matching up to 50% in cost sharing, fixing leaks and saving water, money, and making canals more efficient.
And the measurements show this will save 8,000 acre-feet per season. So if you look at that as on a rental price of water right now, $240,000 a year. So essentially this project pays for itself every year. In good water years, there's water available for renting in the rental pool or wherever. In bad water years, it saves our farmers having to have a shortage late in the summer. So
Crews just have 2 weeks to finish this project. The canal liner is pulled down in long horizontal strips. Crews then weld the pieces together.
Yeah, it's about 850 degrees, and it just kind of depends on temperature of the air. If it's
outdoor
real cold,
temperature affects it.
Yeah.
The Twin Falls Canal Company spent a little to fix a lot, saving water for decades to come.
That's it for this week's podcast. You can drop us a line on Twitter or on Facebook and tell us what you thought of this week's program. For Steve Ritter, this is Jake Putnam and the voice of Idaho Agriculture.